The following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Giants baseball, past, present, and future. I'm Ralph Tyko with the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, and the host of the show is Michael Duca, present and accounted for. Hello,
present
Michael.
And accounted for with a shady past, and let's just talk about the Giants' future today. Let's talk about the recent winter meetings.
Yeah. Good news, bad news. Are you sad most that they didn't get Stanton, or are you saddened most that they didn't get the kid from Japan? I never pronounce his name right. Unada, who signed with the Angels.
Well, I would rather have seen them get Shohei Ohtani. However, the shaky medical situation that's come up since that signing was announced by the Angels is kind of interesting. If you've got a grade 1 elbow sprain already, you're on your way. You may not need Tommy John yet, but you need Tom at least. You're getting close. Yeah, and that makes it a very interesting question as to whether he's going to be able to pitch. He was already, he's showing up with if nothing else, with a repetitive stress injury at age 23, having pitched once a week. That leads to some very interesting questions about just exactly what he's going to be worth in the future. Of course, he may be worth big bucks as a hitter all by himself, so we'll find that out too.
Well, this could come down to whether or not pitchers are being coddled, and that results in injuries, or pitchers are being overused, and that results in injuries. Not just the Giants pitchers, and we'll talk about more in a moment, the pitcher more, not more is less. But I think if they pitched him once a week, he probably wasn't getting enough arm strength build up. That's just my take on it.
Well, it's very typical for Japanese organizations to have a 6-man rotation. That's just basically how starting pitching works over there.
Oh, okay.
However,
they weren't using him that way because he was batting and playing every day, and from that standpoint.
No, for whatever reason, the 6-man rotation is relatively common in the Japanese major leagues. You also want to keep in mind that Japanese training regimens are legendary, and undertraining is not something they are ever successfully accused of. The stories of American players going over there and being shocked to see a starting pitcher come out after 6 innings, go down and throw 3 more innings in the bullpen. They want their pitchers to throw 200 pitches when they make an outing, and if they get bounced early, they go down the bullpen, they throw 100 pitches. If that's what it takes to get to their number for the day. So I don't.
Did his team in Japan consider him a pitcher first or a batter first?
I don't know. My ability to read Japanese has never improved above 0. And that's not the sort of thing that you're going to get in an AP story talking breathlessly about this guy wanting to come to the United States. Hold on for 1 second, Ralph. Allergies are eating me alive today. Sorry. So
is this a case of the Angels not doing their due diligence before signing him?
I don't know. Again, on an international posting like this, I don't know how much information you're allowed to have. I know that it caused, that once Ohtani picked the Angels, they had, he had 21 days to pick a team, and now I think they have a time limit also to sign him, or they get back their $20 million posting fee, and Nippon Ham gets back their pitcher.
Well, you would think a physical exam would be involved somewhere along the line.
Well, apparently it has been. And the word was he was down there, I guess, on Saturday a week ago to be introduced to the press, and by Monday he was back in Japan having the elbow treated. They're not treating it with surgery at this point because it's just a grade 1 sprain, which means a minor tear. But, a minor tear in an elbow ligament, I don't have experience with minor tears with elbow ligaments. I have experience with complete detachment. And when I had a complete detachment of an elbow ligament, it took 7 years for it to fully heal. I'm not an athlete, and I wasn't in shape before, and I wasn't in shape afterwards. And who knows if there might have been something to that. But the doctors told me when the epicondyle tendon removed itself from my arm bone, they said, we can't reattach it, and it's going to take as long as it takes.
What precipitated it? Was it wear and tear, or was it something that you did to it?
For me?
Yeah.
For me, this will prove to you how much out of shape I was, Ralph. I was riding an exercise bike and decided that in order to not get bored riding the bike and perhaps get a tiny bit more exercise, I would do curls with 2-pound dumbbells. That's right, 2 pounds. And in the midst of completing a curl and bringing the weight up almost to touch my bicep, I just felt it snap and roll up like a window shade.
Oh. Well, 7 years. Are you pain-free now, at least?
I've been pain-free almost the entire time. It just, there were just certain times that it would hurt, and it just took a very long time for it to grow back and reattach and do what it needed to do to give me more control over the arm and more strength.
You know, this conversation should put into perspective what athletes have to go through in rehabilitation, in preventing injuries, in nursing injuries, and knowing when you're injured, when it's pain, all this. It's not a computer game. These guys are humans who all recover differently at their own pace, and their pain thresholds are different. So you're talking about world-class athletes, thoroughbred athletes being trained, and the training methods are just being learned, just being revised. There's so much controversy as what is good training. I don't know. It has to make it very difficult for a GM to put money into a pitcher, let's say.
Well, I have always said, Ralph, that pitching is a disaster looking for a roster on which to occur. It's just, it's an unnatural thing that we ask the shoulder and the elbow to do. Mike Krukow once told me that, when rookie pitchers would come up, he would talk to them, and he would ask them a simple question. He would ask them, would you rather your shoulder hurt or your elbow? Because that determines whether you're going to throw a slider or a curveball. Well, not hurting is not a choice.
Yeah, it's going to be one or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Mike Krukow has been suffering of late from the effects of a career of shooting himself with cortisone and getting, training to be out of out of pain, if you will. Doing everything to stay out of pain can cause long-term effects on your body down the road. And
yeah, I'm not sure that what's going on with him is a wear and tear based situation. It is a rare and unusual disease that he has, a neural disease. And they frankly don't know a whole lot about the disease at this point. They don't know enough to be able to say definitively, if you don't do this, you won't get it. So it's, I can tell you this, having known Mike since high school, it's a very difficult thing for those of us who know him to watch. He's taking it with good grace. He's taking it with good humor. But I know for a fact, I mean, I first learned about it 3 years ago plus when he told me he could no longer stand up and hit a golf ball. And that was one of his favorite things to do in the whole world.
Yeah, that has to be terrible. Sorry for him. But he has talked so often on the air of taking cortisone shots that whether or not this is related, the cortisone would take an effect on anyone's body if used over the years. That's just the way it is. And I'm
sure that I'm sure that 30 years ago the medications were less targeted, less specific, less capable than they are now. I would suspect that 30 years of research has brought us things that may have fewer side effects or be more capable of working with lower doses or something.
Right. Let's talk, if not a happier note, a different note. Let's talk the winter meetings, and what I see with the Giants is that they managed to get rid of a pitcher who just didn't seem to be a good fit in San Francisco. I thought the pressure of being traded for a fan favorite, for a teammate favorite in Duffy contributed to his lack of success in San Francisco. Do you agree with that?
Well, it turned out to be a trade that didn't really help either team very much.
Right.
Moore pitched brilliantly for the Giants in 2016. You remember, the biggest controversy of the year was should Bochy have left him in to finish the ninth inning and finish off the Cubs. And in retrospect, it sure looks like he should have. But it's been all downhill from there. Somebody asked me, do you think the Giants made a mistake in trading away a young veteran pitcher with a lot of upside to him, a hard thrower who, is only in his 20s? And I said, well, I think the Giants were looking at it this way. Including the option, they were on the hook to Matt Moore for about $20 million. And I think they believe that they can go into their farm system and put the worst pitcher in baseball back on their roster for a lot less money. I mean, the bar is very, very low. Moore was 6-15 with an ERA that bordered on 6 last year as a starter. And so I think, I would be absolutely flabbergasted if either Ty Block or Chris Stratton put up numbers like that. One of them will take his place in the rotation.
Right. So you're going to win by addition by subtraction is what that comes down to.
Well, it gives the Giants $21 million now to stay under the competitive balance tax, which I think, despite the fact that Larry Baer has told everybody that that's not a primary focus of the team this year, it has to be a primary focus of the team this year. The difference in what it means for their future is absolutely mind-boggling because the tax sunsets in 2020. And the way it works, if you exceed it, you pay a 5% penalty the first year, a 10% penalty the second year. Then I think it jumps to 50% the third year and 100% after that. and if you get over $240 million, the tax kicks in at 197, and if you get over 240, which is where the Dodgers were, it becomes monumental. It's like $1 of penalty for every dollar you're spending. But in addition to that, it also costs you, after you become what's called a repeat offender, it starts costing you international slot money.
Oh, wow.
And if the Giants are able to get under this year, then it all resets back to zero. And that means that 2019, they can go over as much as they want. They'll only pay a 5% penalty, and in 2020 it goes away.
Gotcha.
So everybody, all of these deals that you're looking at right now, Matt Moore with the Giants, the Matt Kemp body swap for the Dodgers and Braves, all of these are designed to position teams to be able to go hog wild next year when Manny Machado and Bryce Harper are both free agents.
Right. Do you think Machado might be moved?
I think Machado will probably be moved by the end of this week.
Okay.
And I don't think the Giants will be a player there. I mean, I think they're going to put in their bid just like everybody else. But I think where they're really hoping to do something is they're hoping to probably try to move Span and maybe another prospect or two to Tampa Bay and see if they can get Evan Longoria.
Wow. He's a terrific third baseman, terrific hitter. Still young.
He is. He is all of those. He is one of only 5 players to, by this point in his career, have over 300 doubles, over 100 stolen bases, and over 300 home runs, and a couple of other goofy categories that I saw thrown in to make sure that the list would be small. But that list of 5 is a pretty amazing list. It includes Ruth and Garrick.
Whoa. That's a good investment. I must say the Mets are looking at Longoria too.
They are, and they've got the same problem the Giants do, the spare in the farm system. They don't have much to entice people.
Right.
And they never have developed the Yankees' ability to spin dross into gold by hyping their prospects. Both the Yankees and the Dodgers have been extraordinarily good at that. The Dodgers have even, if you go back and look at the Dodgers over the last 40 years, they've had more rookies of the year than anyone else, and a whole ton of those rookies of the year never did anything after their rookie year.
You mentioned that on a previous broadcast. We talk about guys like Lefebvre, might have been one.
Todd Hollandsworth, Billy Grabarko. I mean, Bill Sudeikis. The names go on and on and on and on for the Dodgers. And let's put it this way: the really good ones, somehow they managed to keep.
Right. The Garveys, the Russells, those guys.
The Seagers.
Yes.
The Bellingers.
Oh, Bellinger's been an incredible find. And they did manage now to clear Gonzalez. So, for whatever that's worth, that must have been part of this, what you're talking about, because he was immediately DFA'd by Atlanta.
Well, Gonzalez was an interesting case. He had a full no-trade clause, and he waived it because the Braves assured him that he would be DFA'd and be allowed to test free agency.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So
what's
that's
in it for the Braves? They get the draft choices if he leaves? Is that the idea?
No, I don't think they even get draft choices because you have to. That only comes if you are losing a player to free agency and you've made a qualifying offer to him.
So he's just basically dumping Kemp.
Yeah. I mean, they are making room for their left fielder of the future, who is a superior prospect. And in the meantime, they're getting rid of statistically the worst defensive left fielder in baseball last year.
Okay. Now let me ask you this, just in general, not related to what you just said. Can you trust defensive statistics nowadays, and which ones do you put your faith in as to transcending to how the guy really is? You know, statistics are one thing, but you tell me which statistics are looking.
We're getting better. Let's put it that way. Range factor is certainly a more important measurement than fielding percentage. I've never put much stock in fielding percentage. I remember, it was almost 50 years ago now, that Leo Cardenas set the record for shortstops by making only 9 errors in a season. It was the first time a shortstop had played at least 130 games and not made double-digit errors. And then you went and looked at the rest of his numbers and realized the reason he only made 9 errors was because he only got to 25 balls all year. He had 0 range.
Right.
So, I mean, clearly that's an exaggeration, but, you know, the point was he made the fewest errors, but he also got to the fewest balls of any starting shortstop that year, and to make plays on them. And so if you reduce the opportunities, you're probably going to reduce the errors.
Now, you're an official scorer, and errors are up your alley. You know, what's an error, what's a hit? Could a guy with a lot of range, if he can't make the play, just eat the ball and not take the error? Isn't part of it the brain, the idea of the guy should react mentally to whether or not it becomes a mental error, not a physical error?
And only physical errors are deemed errors according to the rules. Misjudgments are not errors. And additionally, in fact, they're not even called errors. They're called an error is defined as a misplay. Therefore, it must be active. It can't be passive. No, you're absolutely right. And many people have come over to me and said, how can you give him an error on that play? Guy goes way into the hole. Shortstop may go behind the third baseman, make a great, brilliant diving stop, get up and throw the ball into the stands.
Got to give him an error. It's a mental error. It's every bit as much of an error.
It's a bad throw. It becomes 2 plays at that point. If you make a brilliant stop, that play is over. Now the question is, are you going to throw? Do you have a throw? Are you going to throw? And if you do make a throw, what does it accomplish?
Right. So the guy with the brain and the range wins out over the guy with the range and no brains and no thinking. Why make the throw if you're not going to get him anyway, and you're so off balance, your chances of getting it there are decreased. Which is
why 2 things are inevitably true. For shortstops, the Gold Glove winners, if you watch them carefully, are not only usually among the best hitters, they also have the strongest arm. That's why Brandon Crawford's up there year after year after year, because his arm covers a multitude of sins. He may not get to a ball as quickly as you'd like. He may not have the perfect footwork when he gets to the ball, but that arm allows him to finish the play that a lot of other shortstops would not be able to finish because they don't have an absolute cannon. The other thing to keep in mind is that's the reason that you see so many of these diving plays in the hole be scored as a hit and an error when the runner gets to second. They're crediting the runner with having put the ball in a place where he was probably not going to be retired. But the flip side of that, you were asking, what about the guy who makes the great play and then just takes a bite out of the ball? Well, you have to kind of, when I have these goofy plays at first base, that's one of the first things that I have to remind people is if he'd taken a bite out of the ball, it would have been a hit. Therefore, if he comes up and bobbles it on the exchange, that's not an error. If he's hurrying to try and make a play that was going to be too close in the first place, that's not an error. If a third baseman comes in and has to barehand a ball and he misses it, that's not an error. That's beyond ordinary effort. So you have those kind of issues that do come up. But the bottom line is, what you were alluding to in the beginning, which is why errors are not a reliable judge of defensive ability, is that errors are, to a certain extent, even with the guidelines we're given, they're still subjective. It's still each scorer's concept of ordinary effort, and this is why there are appeals, and this is why plays get overturned.
Gotcha. You mentioned shortstops and strong arms. I've been watching ball a long time out here in the Bay Area. Have you ever seen a stronger arm on a shortstop than Sean Dunston?
No. No. Sean Dunston was legitimately considered to be used also as a closer by the Cubs.
I was just thinking that. Had he pitched, wow, this guy threw the ball 100 miles an hour. I mean, and he had
regularly. I mean, first basemen were not thrilled with that. He'd like to show off the arm, and he would uncork some throws that would absolutely fracture your mind. I mean, he'd go up the middle and get the ball behind second base and turn around and unleash 100-mile-an-hour sizzler. That was, you got to remember, the first baseman doesn't have any padding in that thing.
Right. I just marvel at memories of him and Arguello, who's the shortstop from Brooklyn. I can't think of how to pronounce his name. He had a very good arm too.
Yeah, I'm not sure of whom you refer, but or to whom you refer. But
why am I blanking on his pronunciation?
For Brooklyn, I mean, the last shortstop I can think of with Brooklyn was Pee Wee Reese.
Right, but he came from Brooklyn. He grew up in Brooklyn and played out here in the 80s, early 90s. And his name goes away from me for now. Prospects that they got for more? Anybody that stands out for you that you think might develop?
Well, they got two guys. One of them is coming off an injury. Both can throw 100 miles an hour when healthy. And the younger of the two is barely 20 years old, so he's got some developing to do. He only made it to A-ball last year. Although the Giants think that he could have performed well at Double-A last year, and they may be looking to start him at Double-A and promote him quickly this season. But sports are all copycat. You know that.
Mm-hmm. What's working at the moment?
Well, yeah, and when the Giants won 3 World Series in 5 years, it was, build a bullpen that can end the game after 7 innings, and pitching and defense. Well, now sabermetricians have decided that you should never let your starting pitcher face the opposing lineup a third time, because the batting averages go from 250 to 310 going from the second to the third time through the lineup on average. And therefore, games tend to fall apart or change hands around the 5th, 6th, and 7th innings. And so what you need to do is let your starter go through the lineup twice. If he's perfect, that gets you 6 innings, but it probably gets you 4 to 5 innings. And then you turn it over to fresh bullpen arms. Well, to do that, you need a lot of bullpen arms, because if you're going to ask the bullpen to give you 4 innings every day, guys can't usually pitch more than 2 days out of 3. So that means you need 7 or 8 arms down there, and everybody wants flamethrowers. And so the Giants went out and collected themselves a couple of younger pitchers with some potential who can throw 100 miles an hour. You can teach command, you can teach control, but you can't teach 100.
Right. Right. It's like you can't teach 7 foot. You can't
right.
teach a 7-foot basketball player. Right. Or you can't coach speed either. You can't really. You can enhance speed with techniques.
Well, you can teach people how to use the speed that they have more efficiently and more effectively. But you cannot, all the Ricky Henderson in the world is not going to make me run the 100-yard dash in less than 14 seconds.
Right.
Not even if he picked me up and carried me.
Well, we can get you an Uber nowadays, which makes it nice and easy.
Well, there you go.
All right.
So we're asking about the Giants at the winter meetings and if I was more upset about not getting Stanton or Ohtani, and the answer to that question is C, the third thing. I was more upset about not getting Ozuna.
Oh, yes. That would have helped, for sure.
But
are they thoroughly
not getting Ozuna,
down on Span? Is Span not definitely not going to be the starting center fielder next year, one way or the other?
Well, I know that if they're in on the Longoria sweepstakes, it's either going to be Span or Pence that goes, and Miami was willing to take Span. I don't know if Tampa is going to be willing to take Span or not. What I do know is that the Cardinals' outfield is now pretty crowded, and it is entirely possible that the Giants, who did not get in on the Piscotty sweepstakes for whatever reason, I mean, the A's were in on that long before Ozuna went there, and by Ozuna going there and Piscotty leaving, if Piscotty was available to begin with, then there should still be another outfielder available now that they've added for certain Ozuna, and I'm thinking that the Giants may try to get Randall Pritchett.
Oh, that's a name I hadn't thought about. How about McCutchen? Is that name crossed?
McCutchen is in play. I think Grichuk is more. I think he's a better fit for the Giants because he's less expensive. They have 3 things that they need to go out and solve in the off season. They need power hitting, at least one power hitting outfielder. They need a third baseman, and they need someone to bolster the left side of the bullpen. They're not necessarily. I mean, if they can go out and get Evan Longoria, obviously they will do it, and getting him might make Christian Arroyo expendable and make him someone that they could put into the deal to acquire him. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, they may wind up having to fall back to Arroyo as their third baseman this year, and that may not be a bad thing.
Right. Tampa Bay has an outfielder, Krenchek, or something like that, is the best defensive outfielder in baseball right now. I'd love to get him. Love to get Jay Bruce, or at least think about Jay Bruce. That's a solid ball player.
Well, I think they're in discussions on Bruce. They're in discussions on Machado. They're in discussions on Longoria. and I'm blanking. I worked some Tampa Bay games last year, and I know who you're talking about. You're talking about their center fielder.
Right.
And I'm just
Fine Shea or something like.
No, it's not. But I will think of it when it no longer matters.
Right, as that's the way it always is on every level in life. Not just podcast radio. This is just the microcosm of it all. Anything you want to feel good about going into because I think the winter meetings, as you said on a previous show, you just get ideas, you see who's interested, you see what you have to bid against. This upcoming week will be very key as to what goes down. Anything you're hopeful for in this coming week?
Well, this week might be key, but see, I posted yesterday on Twitter, for Giants fans to take a breath, because everybody who thought that they didn't accomplish anything at the winter meetings needs to look at the list of players, free agents who are currently available. If I am not mistaken, when I counted yesterday, I think I counted 14 premium players available as free agents, and they're all Scott Boras clients, every last one of them. And
Whoa.
Scott Boras does not like to have his players sign early. He likes to have them wait. He likes to go to the last minute. He likes to have guys sign just before spring training starts. It squeezes the last dollar out. It gets everybody competitive. It gets everybody panicky. They go out and overbid. And, that's not at all uncommon. And I'm really pleased to see that the Giants are in on some of his guys like J.D. Martinez, just because it gives them the ability to find out what Scott Boras of 2018 is like. They dealt with him with Barry Bonds, but there was never a lot of competition for Barry Bonds. It's good for them to get in on this, because if they want to be players for either Harper or Machado next year, guess what? They go through Scott Boras.
Wow. 14 guys under him that are up for free agency in the same year. That's incredible. He knows what he's doing as an agent.
Well, if you stop and think about it, he's going to wait until the first domino is going to be way more expensive than we expect, because the first domino sets the other 13. And since he controls all of them, he's going to make sure that the first guy that signs sets the bar nice and high for everybody else.
Okay. Michael,
that's
quickly,
his job.
We were going to mention the two newest Hall of Fame inductees, and Jack Morris.
Yes. Jack Morris and Alan Trammell. Apparently it was the year of the Tiger.
How did you feel about those two going in?
I'm okay with those two going in. In my opinion, of the people considered by this class, if you were only going to select two, the two that should have gone in were Tommy John and Marvin Miller.
Oh, I'm glad you mentioned Marvin Miller. I can't
because you cannot name anybody in the history of baseball who has had more of an impact on the game as it is played today than those two men.
Right, but wouldn't we be inducting Tommy John's surgeon under those?
No, not necessarily. We are inducting Tommy John for his longevity. He wound up pitching 3 years?
Right.
He won
and then he came
games.
back from the surgery, and he came back a different pitcher, but an equally as effective pitcher. He went from being a thrower to being a pitcher. And so I see what you mean from that.
He won well over 200 games. He was on multiple championship teams, And he caught a child that was thrown out of a window in a fire. I mean, what else do you want the guy to do?
I don't remember that, but if he did that, he needs to have his ticket punched right away. And does this mean that Miller and Tommy John won't be eligible again, or can they?
The way the Hall is doing this now is that they have these committees, and I think they actually seat a new committee each year, and they're rotating eras. So they have this year was nominally the current era. I think it's like from the 1980s to the present. And then they have a committee that does like the 1950s to the 1980s, and then they have a committee that does old baseball before the 1950s. And they rotate each of those through a 3-year cycle. So this group of people will be up again in 3 years.
Okay, well, it's
or I should say this era will be up again in 3 years. And I don't know what the nomination process is because they were given a limited list of people to consider. But I do know that there are 12 people on the committee, and you need 9 votes to be elected, and there are 4 former GMs or owners on the committee, and so as long as there are 4 former GMs or owners, Marvin Miller's not getting in.
That's what that's about. Very sad. Very sad.
Well, yeah, it's very short-sighted because I would simply suggest if people think that things are so terrible now that they go back and look at the value of franchises 40 years ago.
That's true. That's very true. But that's the case that Bud Miller got, Bud Selig got elected on, as far as I'm concerned. The only thing he did good in baseball was for he and his fellow owners. And he's elected. I think anybody who cancels the World Series after they kept the World Series going through World War II, and this guy cancels the World Series over a labor dispute, that man shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame, pure and simple. That's just one man's opinion, as they say.
Well, and interestingly enough, if you remember, that labor dispute wound up being settled by the National Labor Relations Board, and there was a current Supreme Court justice who was the lower court judge who made the initial ruling that brought everything to the NLRB, and then the NLRB was at the time run by Bill Gould, who is a professor at the law school at Stanford and whom frequents the press boxes of both sides of the bay, in particular if the Red Sox are anywhere near town.
Okay. Somebody was telling me the other day about how much the A's draw when the Yankees and the Red Sox come to town. I want to hear how much they draw when the Mets come to town, or you know what I mean, when you don't have, the Mets aren't a good example of that. Say Baltimore comes to town, because you don't have a bunch of people from Baltimore living in the Bay Area. So the A's, we talked about that on a previous show earlier in the week. The A's are at a crossroads once again, and I didn't expect that to happen. To get back to our conversation, I expected the Peralta deal with the A's to go through with no problem. I assumed the A's had, before they brought it this far, I assumed they had all their dots and T's crossed and all that stuff. They didn't. But
well, it's interesting because they brought Dave Cavall in to run the team from the Earthquakes, who were also owned by the ownership group. And he had accomplished a Avaya Stadium down in San Jose. So they brought in the one guy in the organization who had some experience at pulling off something like this. The difference being that San Jose was pretty seriously trying to hang on to their franchises because they were in the process of realizing that they weren't going to get the A's. It is interesting that they went public with all of this before it was locked down. On the other hand, I think they probably felt a need to let the public in on what they were doing. And you know, when you've got a situation like that where you're trying to put a ballpark in what is nominally a neighborhood, you have to win the neighborhood over, and you can't do that in secret. So I understand why they wound up going public maybe a little bit earlier than they might have wanted to. I think their biggest problem here was once upon a time, Ralph, I spent a little chunk of my life, about 15 years, as a management consultant and trainer. And I used to teach, among other things, negotiating skills. And one of the things that I taught people was that the reason that the Russians are such good negotiators, and to a certain extent the Saudis also, is that they have a completely opposite point of view to Americans on negotiating. Americans kind of adopt the Donald Trump attitude of, you know, I'm the biggest swinging you-know-what in the room, and I have the authority to make a deal, so let's make a deal. And the Russians in particular never give their negotiators the authority to make a deal. They give their negotiators the authority to listen and then to leave the room and talk to somebody who has the authority to approve it or not. And as a net result...
Basic difference right there. Absolutely.
Fundamental difference. You know, that just changes the way negotiations occur. Well, I think what happened here is that the A's ran into, despite the fact that he has what sounds like a British accent, possibly from being born in Africa, I'm not sure. I have not really looked up the man's heritage, but the superintendent of the Peralta district, I think, went into the room and sat down with the A's and implied that he had more authority than he actually did. And I think the A's bought it.
Well, that is the A's fault on some level for not doing their research and finding out who did have the authority.
Well, I suppose. I mean, at the same time, if you're negotiating, tell me, would you rather be sitting opposite another guy who is talking to you and representing what you're negotiating about, or would you rather be sitting on your side of the table opposite 7 people who are political nominees and were elected to a board, and each of whom has their own agenda?
Well,
it's probably
to be sitting at the top of whoever is in charge of the group. You know,
exactly.
They have to.
And I think that's what they thought they were doing. I think they thought that they were that in talking to the superintendent, who is hired by the board and supervised by the board, that they assumed that if he represented that he was there to negotiate in good faith in behalf of the board, that he had the board's backing in what he was doing. Apparently,
yes, you would think.
Apparently, you know, but as always, Ralph, always, politics will interfere.
Right. Hey,
So
I just want to make it clear to the audience why I brought this up about the A's. It is vitally important to the Giants, the way I see it, that the A's have a healthy franchise. They need both teams to be strong to have a rivalry. And so anything that concerns the Bay Area concerns the Giants. and the A's situation, it's vitally important that they stay. For the Bay Area.
we do know that when both teams were good, and when the population of the Bay Area was almost 1 million smaller than it is now, when both teams were good in the late 80s, they drew over 5 million combined. And it was the A's who led in attendance. So we know it's possible. And we know that if you put two good teams on the field in the Bay Area, that the baseball fans of this area have more than enough money and more than enough time and more than enough inclination to fill two stadiums.
Yeah.
And if the A's ever get
why I would have loved to see the stadium go to Jack London Square or out there where they can have the two stadiums face each other.
Well, you know what my idea has been all along. I mean, I've had two ideas about stadiums out there. One of them is they should put it on the Oakland Army base, nominally at the foot of the Bay Bridge. Now, the wind would be pretty serious there, so what you'd have to do is you'd have to face the stadium to the hills, but you could wrap the entire outside of the stadium in a glass curtain and have it open so that when people go out on the concourses, their view is of the bridge in the city.
That's very nice. Does the West Oakland BART station accommodate that?
It could. I mean, you've got surface rail service into the Army base. You had to. I mean, that's what its whole function was onloading and offloading of cargo. So that's not a major issue. The second idea that I have, which is really a little bit crazier, but I think it's doable. And I think it's innovative enough that people would look at it and say, wow, they went out and did something that's never been done before and it works. And that's this. When the Warriors leave, you tear down the Coliseum, the arena completely.
Right.
Now, the authority wants to keep the arena there for concerts and other things as a revenue stream. But what I think you do is you tear it down completely and you build a 30,000-seat baseball stadium right there. And you design it with a half a roof. Not a full retractable roof, a half roof. It can be done basically like a Japanese fan that just unfolds from one side of the stadium and rolls out in an arc across to the other side of the stadium. Built into that roof is a system with the capability of putting up a backdrop, drapes. So in essence, you're doing with the stadium what they do with SAP Center down in San Jose. You have the ability to curtain it off. You put concerts in there in the wintertime and when the team's not there. And you use the seating bowl as your basis for seating, and you can put 18 to 20,000 people in for a concert, which is what you can do now.
So what happens to the stadium that's already there?
Well, once you have the new baseball stadium with this capability, that goes away and becomes a parking structure. Furthermore, if I were in charge of the world, if you were coming from the south, you'd have to park in the south parking lots. And if you're coming from the north, you'd have to park in the north parking lots. There would not be access to both. That way, I think you would have faster ingress and faster egress.
That's a good one. I'd also like to see BART running a little longer. It would put people's minds at ease about taking public transportation to a game if they knew they can get home on public transportation.
Yeah, that's even a problem for the Giants. I mean, as you know, my wife works there, and she takes BART into work.
Right.
But I pick her up and bring her home because the last train leaves the Embarcadero at 12:10 a.m., which means you have to be on Muni by 11:40 to ensure being there by 12:10. And there isn't always a Muni, and the games aren't over in time for her to be out of there by 11:40. So we have to drive home. It's simply not possible to rely on being able to have a BART train there when she leaves, because we've had extra inning games. I've been at that ballpark at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning.
Well, if you've ever had an extra inning game at night game at Candlestick, you wouldn't have minded the 2:30 in the morning at AT&T.
Yeah, no, I've done them. I have a hat totally paved in craw to Candlestick.
Oh wow. Well earned, well deserved. Anytime you get even one, you're a hero. It's like a little bit of a Purple Heart.
I used to have seats behind home plate, but I had a half-season ticket. In other words, I had tickets to 40 games.
Mm-hmm.
And so in alternating years, on like odd years, I would have access to my seats for opening day, and on even years, I wouldn't.
Right.
And they would give me access instead. They would let me buy seats somewhere else in the park. One year, those seats were in row 21 of section 63 upper reserved. I don't know if you remember how it was laid out, but that was absolute dead center field between the flagpoles, about 6 rows from the top of the stadium. Opening night against the Dodgers, it was like 51 degrees at first pitch, and the wind was blowing 30 miles an hour. By the 4th inning, the wind chill was down to around 38 degrees out there.
So you're a hero. Those crawled the Candlestick, they called them. Am I correct?
Yeah. I don't know if I'm a hero or if my judgment is just highly suspect.
All right, Michael, we're coming to the end of it. Thank you so much, as usual. We are well informed as Giants apologists all over the country. And
always a pleasure, Ralph. And
it's always my pleasure,
off,
Michael. I want to remind the audience that if they enjoy this or any of the offerings on Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, to please box up some lightly used children's books and take them to your Head Start program wherever you are, whatever community, state, whatever city you live in, there's a Head Start program around. Get kids reading, get them ready for school, and that would be terrific.
And I want to take a moment to point out that Ralph said lightly used children's books and not lightly used children.
Oh, I know that
Please
was in a different state. I was accused of that years ago. There is no corroboration. I promise you, if I can be elected, we'll get it all started. We'll get it all taken care of. It was books. It wasn't children. It was that one squeaky mom who misunderstood. So
right, less is more.
Absolutely, but we solved it, and it didn't appear on any of my public records or anything. But thank you
All right.
bringing it up.
After you sign off, please stay on the phone. I need to chat with you offline.
I will. I'm going to push the button, and we will be signed off. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Over and out.